Okay, so you want to own a cemetery. A quiet piece of land at the edge of town. Rows of headstones. Trees along the road. A small office near the entrance. A maintenance shed behind the fence. Families walking slowly across the grass. Flowers placed on marble. And a map showing hundreds, maybe thousands, of spaces that can still be sold. That is the picture. It sounds like one of the simplest land businesses in the world. Buy land. Divide it into plots. Sell the plots. Collect the money. Maintain the grounds. Wait for the next family to call. Because people may stop going to malls. They may stop buying movie tickets. They may stop eating at certain restaurants. But people do not stop dying. Every town needs a place for the dead. Every family needs somewhere to go. Every grave looks like a small piece of land that can be sold. That is the dream, and it is not entirely wrong. The problem is what happens after the plot is sold. Because a cemetery is not really a business about selling land. It is a business about selling land once and promising to care for it for generations. That is the part people miss. A house can be sold again. A hotel room can be sold every night. A parking space can be sold every hour. A burial plot is different. Once the family buys it, that piece of ground is no longer inventory. But the grass above it still grows. The road beside it still cracks. The tree nearby still drops branches. The records still have to be kept. And the family may come back 40 years later expecting the place to look dignified. That is the business. You sell the plot once. You maintain the cemetery forever. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what a cemetery actually is. Because cemetery is one of those words that sounds simple until you look at the ownership. A small church cemetery is not the same business as a private memorial park. A municipal cemetery is not the same thing as a for-profit cemetery company. A historic cemetery in a city is not the same thing as a new suburban cemetery with acres of unused land. A green burial ground is not the same asset as a cemetery filled with mausoleums, crypts, columbaria, and family estates. A cemetery attached to a funeral home is not the same business as a standalone burial ground. They all hold the dead. But financially, they are not the same machine. Some cemeteries sell burial plots. Some sell mausoleum crypts. Some sell cremation niches. Some sell family estates. Some sell opening and closing services. Some sell monuments, markers, vaults, and memorial products. Some rely on donations. Some rely on trust fund income. Some rely on events, tours, and community support. And some rely on being part of a larger death care network. This is the first thing nobody tells you. You're not really buying grass and headstones. You are buying inventory, records, reputation, and a permanent maintenance obligation. The land matters. The location matters. The number of unsold spaces matters. But the real asset is not the grass. The real asset is the right to sell memory in a place families believe will still be cared for when they're gone. Before a cemetery makes $1, it has to be planned like a small town for the dead. You need roads, drainage, water access, irrigation, trees, fencing, a front gate, a maintenance building, mapping systems, accurate burial records, heavy equipment, staff, liability insurance, regulatory approval, and a design that lets families find a grave not just next week, but decades from now. That sounds like a list. It is really a promise. The family is not just buying dirt. They are buying the belief that this dirt will not be forgotten. That promise starts costing money before the first plot is sold. The road has to be paved. The grass has to be planted. The drainage has to work. The office has to open. The maps have to be accurate. The mower has to run. And the cemetery has to look peaceful before the family decides to trust it with someone they love. Now look at how the money comes in. The first revenue layer is the burial right. This is what most people think of as the plot. In many cases, the family is not buying the land the way they would buy a house. They are buying the right to be buried in a specific space. That difference matters. The cemetery still has to operate the grounds. The family gets a burial right. The cemetery keeps the responsibility. Plot prices can vary enormously by location, type of cemetery, and the specific section of the grounds. A rural public cemetery may sell spaces at a very different price from a private cemetery in a major metro area. A A single grave may be one price. A double-depth grave may be another. A family estate may be something else entirely. The second revenue layer is opening and closing. This is the work of opening the grave, preparing the space, handling the burial, closing the grave, and restoring the site. To a family, it may look like a simple labor charge. To the cemetery, it is scheduling equipment, staff, liability, weather risk, and coordination with the funeral home. A burial does not happen because there is empty land. It happens because the cemetery can safely and correctly open that land at the right time. The third revenue layer is the vault, liner, marker, and monument ecosystem. Some cemeteries require grave liners or vaults. Families may buy flat markers. They may buy upright headstones. They may buy benches, plaques, vases, or custom memorials. The cemetery may sell these directly, install them, approve them, or charge fees around their placement. This is where the cemetery becomes part land business, part construction business, and part memory business. The fourth revenue layer is cremation placement. This is becoming more important. As cremation rises, fewer families may need a full-size burial plot, but they may still want a permanent place to visit. That creates demand for columbarium niches, cremation gardens, urn burial spaces, scattering gardens, and memorial walls. Cremation can reduce traditional burial revenue, but it can create a different kind of cemetery inventory. A full grave takes more land. A niche takes less space. The price is lower, but the density can be higher. That changes the math. The fifth revenue layer is pre-need. This is when families buy cemetery property before death. For the family, it locks in a place and reduces stress later. For the cemetery, it creates future commitments, near-term cash flow, and a pipeline of customers who may later buy related services. But pre-need is not free money. It is a promise sold before the service is needed. The cemetery may collect money today, but the burial may happen years later. Costs can rise. Rules can change. The family can move away. Records can be lost. Ownership can change. And the promise still has to be honored. That is the first major trap. Cash today can become an obligation tomorrow. The sixth revenue layer is perpetual care or maintenance funding. This is where cemeteries become different from almost every other land business. In many places, cemeteries are required to set aside part of lot sales into a perpetual care or endowment fund. That money is supposed to help maintain the grounds long after the original sale. In theory, the cemetery sells a plot and invests part of the proceeds. The income from that fund helps pay for mowing, landscaping, roads, records, and general care. In reality, the math can be difficult. If the fund is too small, the maintenance problem does not disappear. It just moves into the future. Now build a simple cemetery model. Imagine a cemetery has 5,000 saleable burial spaces. The average plot sells for $3,000. That sounds like $15 million of gross plot revenue. It looks beautiful on paper. But now take out the parts that are not really free cash. Some of the money may need to go into perpetual care. Some pays for roads. Some pays for grading. Some pays for drainage. Some pays for irrigation. Some pays for sales staff. Some pays for administration. Some pays for equipment. Some pays for debt. And the revenue does not arrive all at once. It arrives over years, maybe decades. Now, imagine the cemetery sells 150 plots a year. At $3,000 each, that is $450,000 in annual plot sales. Add opening and closing fees, markers, vault-related revenue, niches, and other services, and the top line may look stronger. But the cemetery still has to be maintained every week. Not only in the sections that sold this year. All of it. The older graves, the newer graves, the roads, the trees, the fence, the records, the office, the irrigation. The cemetery is not paid only to care for the new sale. It is expected to care for the whole place. That is the second major trap. The revenue comes from the living. The obligation is to the dead. Now change one variable. Cremation rises. Families still need death care, but fewer families choose full-size burial plots. Some choose direct cremation. Some choose scattering. Some choose a niche. Some choose no cemetery placement at all. The cemetery may still serve the community, but the highest value inventory may sell more slowly. The grass does not care. The mower still runs. The water bill still arrives. The maintenance crew still gets paid. The office still opens. That is how a stable demand business starts to feel unstable. People still die, but they may stop buying the same product. This is why cemeteries can be both scarce and financially fragile. Land for burial may be limited. Plots in good locations may appreciate. Families may pre-purchase spaces years in advance. But if a cemetery has already sold most of its land, the future changes. A new cemetery has inventory. An old cemetery has obligations. The new cemetery sells the promise. The old cemetery has to keep it. That is the third major trap. The better a cemetery sells today, the closer it gets to the day when it has less to sell tomorrow. At some point, a cemetery can become land-rich and cash-poor. It owns a beautiful place. It has generations of families connected to it. It may have historical value. It may have trees, monuments, roads, and memory everywhere. But if most of the plots are already sold, new revenue becomes harder. The maintenance does not become easier. This is one reason small cemeteries struggle. A small-town cemetery may not have a large endowment. It may rely on plot sales and donations. If plot sales slow down, donations weaken, water costs rise, equipment breaks, or volunteers disappear, the math can become painful. The cemetery is still sacred, but the mower needs fuel. The grass needs water. The records need someone to maintain them. The graves still need to be marked correctly. The living may assume the cemetery will always be there. The balance sheet may say something else. That is what failure can look like in this business. Not a dramatic collapse. No fire. No broken roof. No empty mud. Just grass that is not cut often enough. A road that starts to crack. A fence leaning at the back. Records stored in old boxes. A maintenance shed with aging equipment. A board asking the community for donations. And families wondering why a place that holds so much history has so little money. That is one death shape of the cemetery business. Not the death of demand. The death of funding. Now, look at the corporate version of the same problem. The Lowen Group grew by buying funeral homes and cemeteries. The idea made sense. Death care was fragmented. Local operators were aging. Demand looked stable. A larger company could buy many small businesses, centralize systems, use scale, and turn a local industry into a platform. That is the roll-up story. It sounds logical, and sometimes it works, but debt changes the story. By 1999, Lowen was under enormous pressure from the debt created by its aggressive acquisition strategy. The business did not fail because people stopped dying. It failed because stable demand could not carry an unstable balance sheet. That is the fourth major trap. You could buy cemeteries. You could buy funeral homes. You could buy local brands. But if you buy too many, pay too much, and borrow too heavily, the dead cannot bail you out. A cemetery is not magic. It is still a business. Debt still has to be serviced. Maintenance still has to be funded. Customers still have choices. Trust still matters. And a spreadsheet can still break. Now compare the weak version with the strong version. The weak version buys a cemetery because land is scarce and everyone dies. It looks at the unsold plots. It multiplies by the plot price. It calls at the opportunity. It ignores the roads. It ignores the mowing. It ignores the water. It ignores the records. It ignores the perpetual care fund. It ignores the fact that selling inventory today creates maintenance obligations tomorrow. That buyer is not buying a cemetery. That buyer is buying a future problem. The strong version starts with the care obligation. How many plots are unsold? How fast are they selling? How much money is in the maintenance fund? How much of the grounds are already committed? How much does it cost to maintain the entire property each year? How much land can still be developed? How much demand is shifting to cremation? How strong is the local brand? How accurate are the records? How much deferred maintenance is hiding behind the trees? That is a real buyer, not someone buying land, someone buying time. This is why the best cemetery operators do not only sell burial plots. They manage inventory. They manage trust funds. They manage memorial products. They manage cremation demand. They manage local history. They manage families who may come back long after the original sale. And in some cases, they manage the relationship between a funeral home, a crematory, and a cemetery together. That is where large operators like Service Corporation International become powerful. SCI is not just one cemetery. It is a network of funeral homes and cemeteries across many markets. At that scale, the company is not only selling graves. It is managing locations, brands, cemetery property, pre-need sales, funeral services, and long-term customer relationships. A standalone cemetery may wait for a family to call. A platform can meet the family at multiple points. Funeral planning, cemetery property, cremation placement, memorial products, pre-need arrangements, follow-up services. That is not just a burial ground. That is a death care ecosystem. Scale does not remove the maintenance problem, but scale can give the operator more ways to earn around it. Now, look at another success model. Some historic cemeteries are not trying to behave like pure burial businesses anymore. They host walking tours, dog programs, community events, film nights, markets, history programs, bird watching, cultural gatherings. To some people, that may sound strange. A cemetery as a community space. But economically, it makes sense. If a cemetery is running out of burial space, it still has land, beauty, history, trees, roads, and public meaning. It can either become an underfunded relic, or it can become a living civic asset. The cemetery does not stop being sacred. It adds reasons for the living to return. That is a different kind of revenue model. Not just selling graves, keeping the place relevant. Now, look at the future. The cemetery of the next 50 years may not look like the cemetery of the last 100. More cremation, more columbaria, more cremation gardens, more green burial, more natural burial grounds, more families who do not want a traditional casket burial, more families who still want a place to remember. This is the key. Even if burial changes, remembrance does not disappear. People may not all want the same grave, but many still want a place, a name, a marker, a tree, a wall, a bench, a garden, a place to bring flowers, a place that says this person was here. That is the real product, not the dirt, not the stone, the place where memory becomes physical. So can owning a cemetery make money? Yes, but not in the simple way people imagine. The good version works when the cemetery has remaining inventory, strong local demand, disciplined pricing, a healthy maintenance fund, clean records, controlled costs, and new product for cremation and memorialization. The bad version works for a while too. It sells plots, collects cash, postpones maintenance, underfunds care, borrows against the future. And then one day the inventory is lower, the fund is too small, the grass is still growing, and the families are still coming. That gap is where the business is won or lost. A cemetery is a strange asset. It is land, but not ordinary land. It is real estate, but not ordinary real estate. It is a service business, but the customer may be gone before the service is finished. It is a sales business, but selling too much today creates obligations tomorrow. It is a memory business, but memory has maintenance costs. So if you decide to own a cemetery, understand what you are actually buying. You are buying land that can only be sold in pieces. A map that must remain accurate. Grass that will keep growing. Roads that will keep cracking. Trees that will keep falling. Families that will keep returning. A maintenance fund that may or may not be enough. A reputation that can take decades to build. And a promise that outlives almost everyone who signed the contract. You thought the business was selling graves. But the grave is only the beginning. The grave is not the business. The promise to care for it is.